The King of New Orleans. By Greg Klein. Chapter 3. Chapter 4. August 2, 1980. Like the Junkyard Dog, the fabulous Freebirds were unknown nationally until they hit it big in Mid-South. In some ways they were even more unlikely stars than Sylvester Ritter, but like JYD, their success came paired with popular, iconic music that would become synonymous with their act. After their mutual success took them to the height of the wrestling business, they would have a similar fall from grace. The Freebirds were a two-man team in the beginning. Michael Zeitz entered wrestling at the age of 19 in 1977 under the name of Michael Hayes. Tall and skinny with long, bleached blonde hair and a grating, smoke and whiskey voice, Hayes excelled on the microphone. He was the classic wrestling talker, a better worker on the mic than in the ring. For that reason, he became the perfect partner for Terry Gordy. 2 years younger than Hayes, Gordy conned his way into wrestling 2 years earlier, in 1975. According to wrestling legend, he was only 14 years old at the time. Even then, however, he looked like a wrestler. He made up for his baby face with his height, bulk, and long, curly hair. He was also a natural in the ring, a perfect mix of aggression, strength, and enthusiasm. The one ingredient he lacked, interview skills, Hayes possessed in spades. They first met in Eastern Tennessee in 1977, where they likely crossed paths with Ritter, as well, and became a formal tag team in Mississippi in 1978. In 1978, Mississippi experienced a minor promotional war, a small version of the squabbles that fill the history of pro wrestling territories. Tri-State Wrestling, led by Watts and McGurk, was being sued by its former promoter, George Culkin. Culkin had decided to promote his own shows and pulled away from Tri-State. He mostly had small towns, inexperienced talent, and marginal success. If Louisiana was a dead area for wrestling, Mississippi was like a desert, or perhaps the dead zones of the nearby Gulf of Mexico, with nothing worth promoting short of Jackson. As noted, McGurk's wrestlers thought they were being punished if they ended up in that part of the territory. When Watts joined the partnership, it usually only went to Jackson, where it was winning big against the Outlaw Group. Even with the rest of the state basically free of competition, Culkin's promotion failed. He responded with an antitrust lawsuit. On its face, the lawsuit had little merit, since the two promotions fought over little more than the state capital. More likely, it was fueled by lawyers' fees and personal animosity between ex-partners. However, under the surface, Watts himself admits to some classic pro wrestling double crosses. For one, Tri-State employed Culkin's nephew, Jack Curtis, as a road agent who handled arena shows. Plus, at various times in 1978, Culkin employed both Ernie Ladd and Grizzly Smith. Smith even worked as Culkin's booker, a job Watts felt Smith did without success. For a business filled with double crosses and friends becoming enemies and then becoming friends again, some healthy suspicion of the Mississippi War could be justified. Then, when Culkin's promotion began to fail, Tri-State started taking its talent. Ladd came first, in time to set up his historic Superdome show and feud with Ray Candy. Smith also called Tri-State, hoping to jump, too. Watts convinced him to stay in Mississippi, admitting that Smith's poor booking for Culkin was actually helping Tri-State win the war. When Smith pleaded poverty, Watts claims he arranged for Curtis to bring Smith a weekly gift of $400 to help him feed his family and to keep him working for the opposition. As a postscript to the Mississippi War, when Watts and McGurk split and Watts demanded Louisiana for his territory, McGurk agreed only if Watts took Mississippi and the antitrust lawsuit with it. Watts agreed, worked out a deal with Culkin, and called off the lawyers. As part of the deal, Culkin became the Mississippi promoter for Mid-South. He was one of the promoters who objected to a black man being the star of the show. JYD responded by razzing him endlessly in promos, often mentioning how he would head over to Culkin's house after the matches for a dinner of fried chicken and watermelons. Before the split, and before Culkin's promotion ended, Tri-State tried to poach Terry Gordy. Watts, perhaps seeing himself in the big, naturally tough 300-pounder with fire in his belly, loved Gordy from the beginning. He tried to get him to come in as a singles wrestler. Gordy, still a teenager, refused to work without his buddy Hayes. They came in as a team. The booker at the time, Buck Robley, apparently didn't like them and wanted to trade them to the Florida promotion, but Watts vetoed the move. He liked Gordy too much to give up on him quickly. However, Watts didn't care for Hayes, at least in the ring. Watts did appreciate Hayes' ability to talk, and especially his skill at making a crowd hate him. He sensed big money in that ability, if only he could limit Hayes in the ring. He tried his best to transition Hayes into being Gordy's manager. Old-school pro wrestling managers usually served as mouthpieces for wrestlers who weren't great talkers, so the transition could have worked. In addition, lots of promotions made money using the angle of the good guy who has to go through the monster heel to get at his hated, loudmouth sneak of a manager. Unfortunately for Watts, but fortunately for his promotion, Hayes resisted being taken out of the ring. Gordy, of course, backed his friend. Determined to keep them happy, pacify his booker, groom his young talent, and still limit Hayes in the ring, Watts looked for another solution. Enter Buddy Roberts. 15 years older than Hayes, Roberts, whose real name is Dale Hay, had become an experienced hand in wrestling, especially in the tag ranks. Trained by Ivan Koloff and originally billed as Dale Valentine, brother of wrestling legend Johnny Valentine, Hay had gotten a previous big break in the business from Watts after Watts bought into the Tri-State promotion in 1970. Hay had been wrestling for Midwest promoter Vern Gagne as a jobber, a losing wrestler whose job it was to make the stars look good. Sensing talent, Watts brought him into Oklahoma and made him half of the tag team the Hollywood Blondes, with veteran Jerry Brown. In addition, Watts renamed him Buddy Roberts. Pairing a veteran hand with a green boy in a tag team was a long-held tradition. It gave new life to the veteran and some ring and road wisdom to the rookie. It worked for Hay. Watts, in one of the highest compliments you could give a wrestler, said that he believed Roberts was the type of guy you could beat endlessly without harming him at all in the eyes of the fans. Now he had the opportunity to give back to Hayes and Gordy. Roberts gelled with the brash Southerners in and out of the ring. Hayes provided the lip, Gordy the power, and Roberts the ring generalship. The threesome clicked even better outside the ring, and they soon became known for their hard partying ways. Along the way, Hayes started calling Roberts Buddy Jack for his love of Jack Daniel's whiskey. Their exploits and consumption became legendary, and for Gordy and many of their running mates, eventually deadly. Although Roberts was Canadian, the threesome became known as Southern Rebels of the highest, or lowest, order. Their theme song might have been Wild-Eyed Southern Boys by the band 38 Special had they not come up with something more creative for their team name. Drawing from the hit song Freebird, from another Southern rock band, the wildly popular Lynyrd Skynyrd, the group became known as the Fabulous Freebirds. As with JYD, music became a big part of the Freebirds act. Both JYD and the Freebirds used musical intros, and within a few years every wrestling act followed suit. When television exposure forced the payment of royalties, promotions created their own songs. The Freebirds even recorded a track of their own, with Hayes singing, called Bad Street, USA, named after their alleged hometown. As musicians, they were no Skynyrd. Actually, they got more comparisons to Van Halen as an act, not as musicians, with Roberts as the workmanlike brother, Gordy as the spectacular Eddie Van Halen, and Hayes as the less technically sound but flashy showman David Lee Roth. Hayes and Roth even resembled each other, both were tall, thin, and blonde. After a while the resemblance became deliberate, for Hayes at least, with the spandex and the long hair and the vamping. Although their music was pure camp, as a wrestling act the Freebirds were rock stars. In the spring of 1980, Watts's new acts began to get over. Of course this meant that the new people's hero, the Junkyard Dog, would soon meet the Dirty Birds. Because Watts stressed the athletic competition of his promotion most of all, any storyline between JYD and the Freebirds would be based on wrestling rivalry. To take it a step further, the rivalry would be developed over the mainstay of most wrestling promotions, the wrestling titles. When the feud began, the Freebirds, specifically Hayes and Gordy, held the Mid-South Tag Team titles, having won them from Watts and Robley in Shreveport in November 1979. Watts stepped out of the picture. He would soon retire from the ring for nearly 4 years at this point, and JYD became Robley's tag team partner. Step 1 in Junkyard Dog's push to superhero status came from winning titles. In a 6-week period in the spring of 1980, he won every title in the territory, except the biggest singles title, the North American Heavyweight Championship. For various reasons, Watts saved that conquest for later. Instead, he loaded up his new star with the other titles he promoted. First, on March 14, 1980, in Shreveport, JYD beat Ladd for the Louisiana State Championship. In April, he beat Bull Ramos for the Mississippi State Championship. Watts and his announcers made special note of the fact that no wrestler had ever held both titles at the same time. To cap it off, and make the feat that much more amazing, Dog and Robley defeated the Freebirds in Monroe, Louisiana, to win the tag team titles. Suddenly, JYD was no longer just the hot young rookie who had blown through the competition like no other wrestler. He was the guy who had won 3 titles back to back to back. No doubt the fans took notice. Of course, the Freebirds vowed revenge. The Freebirds would not have to wait long for their revenge. In May, Gordy won the Louisiana title from JYD in Shreveport. A month later, Gordy and Roberts won the tag team titles back in New Orleans. Both bouts featured major interference. JYD would never lose any other way in Mid-South. Of course he swore revenge, but that would have to wait longer, until a Superdome event. To get to the Dome, Watts wanted a major angle, something that meant even more than winning back a title. He drew from something more primal than championships, something close to life itself, the gift of sight. The blinding of a competitor had been a major wrestling angle before. It was a huge draw in Los Angeles in 1971, when villainous John Tolos blinded Freddie Blassie, setting up huge crowds for Blassie's revenge, including a California record for attendance. Big angles traveled from promotion to promotion by word of mouth, and copycat angles popped up soon after. Watts claims he heard about the idea from his friend Dusty Rhodes, a main events star from Florida who often flew in for the big Superdome events. About a month before the scheduled Dome show, the feud between the Birds and JYD escalated to the point where they were fighting over hair. The Birds had tried to embarrass JYD by threatening his locks, but JYD got the upper hand and instead cut off some of Hayes's. The Freebirds swore revenge by challenging JYD to a hair versus hair match in which the loser would be shaved bald. Normally, under such rules, the hair is cut with a razor or scissors. In this case, Watts added a crucial twist. The hair would be removed by a secret concoction dubbed the Freebird Hair Removing Cream. JYD won the match, but Gordy and Roberts attacked from outside the ring. By mistake, they got the hair removal cream in JYD's eyes, blinding him. For Watts, the hair cream made the angle more logical and added to Mid-South's credibility. A promotion that didn't care about the logical conclusions of every angle or the intelligence of its fans would have the bad guys simply act with malice and blind their foes. The good guy would then sit out until he recovered from the injury, while the bad guy continued to wrestle, or sat out a brief suspension. Eventually, the good guy would demand that the suspension be lifted so he could gain revenge. No one ever went to jail for the crime, although a fan or two surely wondered why the police hadn't gotten involved. To Watts, such a logical flaw meant the death of promotional credibility. Given his promotional philosophy, he could never allow such a transgression. Plus, he wanted to sell the injury as career-ending, an accident that may have caused permanent vision loss. Under such a setup, JYD couldn't even beg for the reinstatement of the Freebirds. By making the blinding an accident, or causing enough doubt that the Freebirds could protest that it had been an accident, even as they gloated about it to the enraged fans, Watts could justify not suspending them. This created the eventual payoff. To sell the injury, Watts paid JYD to stay home. Video segments were filmed where he went to malls and supermarkets, trying to live life as a blind man. When JYD's daughter, LaToya, was born, Watts used the coincidence for increased heat, filming an interview with JYD, in which he lamented not being able to see his baby being born. Fans' sympathy was unbelievable, and the animosity toward the Freebirds was toxic. Even prior to the 70s, there were already doubters who questioned the legitimacy of pro wrestling, and a blinding angle could certainly be met with skepticism. However, Mid-South fans believed. As a testament to their belief, when Watts and his announcers sold that JYD's career was over and he'd have to find a new way to support his young family, thousands of dollars were sent to the Mid-South offices as donations. The money came in small amounts, a few $1 bills in one envelope, a $5 in another. Mid-South fans weren't just concerned. With no hope of JYD gaining revenge, they wanted to take matters into their own hands, and several tried. At the time, especially in Mid-South, angry fans were commonplace. Often, bad guys hid in the trunk of someone else's car when traveling to or leaving an arena, both so their car wouldn't be vandalized or destroyed, and so they wouldn't be mobbed by angry hordes. Many times, wrestlers were attacked or had to fight their way through the crowd to the dressing room after the match. Occasionally someone was stabbed. For the most unruly crowds, in New Orleans in particular, Mid-South employed a large number of security guards to storm the crowd and protect the wrestlers. Troublemakers were not just stopped. Often they were taken to a place known simply as the room where the guards, Watts, and often the wrestler who was attacked would beat them up to send a message that such violence would earn retaliation. Even with the looming specter of the room and the visibility of the security, the rabid crowd would sometimes cross the line. With the Freebirds' attack on JYD, it must have seemed inevitable that someone would go too far. And, indeed, someone did. A few weeks before the Superdome show, JYD appeared on television to say his goodbye. The angle was shot in New Orleans, at the downtown Municipal Auditorium, rather than at the television studio in Shreveport. As Dave Meltzer, Dean of Wrestling Journalists, wrote in his Wrestling Observer newsletter, today this would be angle alert, but in those days, people didn't see it coming. The Freebirds showed up, most likely to attack JYD. Instead, a fan jumped into the ring with a gun and pointed it directly at Hayes. "Don't worry, dog, I'm covering you," he yelled. The Freebirds were frozen. JYD, selling being blind, couldn't even react. It could have gotten ugly. Instead, security stormed the ring and disarmed the fan, who undoubtedly ended up in the room. Hayes would anger hundreds of thousands of fans during his career, and use underhanded tactics in dozens of big matches and angles, but his heat would never be as great as it was in New Orleans that summer. In one interview he commented, "I've never in my life felt more threatened than in that era." The promotion continued to give updates on JYD that stressed he would likely never regain his sight. Certainly, he would never wrestle again. JYD, however, did make one last request. He demanded that the promotion give him one opportunity to get his revenge on Hayes. Of course, the match would take place in New Orleans, at the Superdome Spectacular, in front of a record-setting crowd. Hayes, for his part, kept up the villainous interviews, insulting JYD, New Orleans, the fans, the promotion, and anything else that would turn the heat up higher. Since JYD couldn't see, he requested that the match include an added stipulation. It would be a dog collar match. Both men would wear dog collars around their necks, each attached to a steel chain. That way, even without his vision, JYD could always have Hayes within his grasp. As a semi-main event, Robley and Rhodes would battle Gordy and Roberts in a double bull rope match, with two sets of wrestlers, one heel and one babyface, attached to each other by a bull rope made lethal by the addition of a steel cowbell in the middle. The dual stipulations worked together to add a nice bit of professional wrestling cliché. After months of being cowardly, the Freebirds could neither run nor hide. On August 2, 1980, more than 26,000 paid to see JYD's revenge. The attendance was actually announced as 36,000, but pro wrestling ticket sales were almost always inflated. To paraphrase Meltzer, even though the truth is impressive, why not make it more impressive with a lie? In reality, the announced date of $183,000 was probably less than what fans actually paid. Simply put, in the corrupt, kickback-heavy world of Louisiana politics, some money was likely shaved off the top for the political cronies and criminals. Despite the looseness of the figures, it was the largest crowd and gate in the history of both the territory and New Orleans. In fact, it was the largest indoor crowd in the history of pro wrestling at the time, and for a few weeks it was the second largest gate ever, behind only the 1976 Shea Stadium show in New York City that featured Bruno Sammartino vs. Stan Hansen, and the closed-circuit broadcast of the Muhammad Ali-Antonio Inoki fiasco from Tokyo. August 1980 turned out to be a big month for wrestling crowds. A week after the Superdome show, Sammartino drew about 30,000 fans for his revenge feud against former protege Larry Zbyszko at Shea Stadium. Ticket prices were much higher in New York City than they were in New Orleans, so the Shea show made more than $500,000, blowing away the old record in the Mid-South show. However, a similar outdoor show in Tampa, headlined by Dusty Rhodes challenging NWA champ Harley Race, couldn't beat the Superdome numbers. In August 1980, the Junkyard Dog gained his revenge and beat his hated rival, Michael Hayes. Rhodes and Robley set the tone by winning their match, as well. For at least a week after the event, JYD's last match toured around the territory, drawing sellouts everywhere. Of course, JYD won those matches, as well. The promotion had its best week ever, and announced itself as a major player in professional wrestling. According to Meltzer, JYD made $12,000 in 7 days, which was unheard of for a grappler at the time. The paycheck didn't shock the world, however, because payoffs were still a pretty well-guarded secret then. However, the news of the huge crowd and gate receipts did travel. Many in wrestling had never heard of Sylvester Ritter or Michael Hayes or Terry Gordy. They knew Buddy Roberts only as a mid-card, or job, guy. They certainly did know Bill Watts, but most had expected him to fail miserably in his attempt to buck the established tri-state territory by going it alone in a wasteland for professional wrestling. The next month, the Junkyard Dog and a young wrestler named Terry Orndorff, brother of the established headliner Paul Orndorff, would regain the Mid-South Tag Team titles from the Freebirds. The Freebirds would soon, as all good vanquished villains should, hightail it out of town. They would turn up in Georgia and parlay their newfound stardom into a run on national cable television. However, their biggest stardom would come a year later, in Dallas, when they set the wrestling world ablaze again, this time in a feud with the Von Erich family. For the Junkyard Dog, it was mission accomplished. Mid-South had created its superstar. Business would ebb and flow over the next 4 years, but Mid-South would grow into one of the top territories, Watts into one of the top promoters, and the Junkyard Dog into one of the country's hottest babyfaces. In some ways, August 2, 1980, was the zenith of that era, at least in terms of single-card attendance. In many other ways, the story about the Junkyard Dog had only just begun. More good times and bad waited ahead.